Welcome, 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 everyone. So before we start, I want you all to know that we are recording this call. So for those girls that are in our Core Lifers group that have to log off or that weren't able to make it today, you do get the benefit of watching this call on replay. And if you are going to ask any questions, know that it is being recorded. I am so excited to have you guys here today. Most of you on this group, actually all of you on this group right now know me, and I am Caroline de Posada, founder of Caro's Core Challenges, and I have brought on today my dear friend, Dave Bricker. Dave Bricker is a writer. He has authored 12 books. One of my favorites is The Story. If you haven't read this book, it's a voyage through the islands of connection and engagement for writers, speakers, professionals, and visionaries. Elizabeth, this is a book that I think you would really enjoy. He has written many other books. He's an award-winning speaker. He's a designer. He teaches love. He's a presentation coach, likes to refer to himself as a tough love presentation coach because he puts you to the test. And he's a transatlantic sailor. You heard that correctly. He has traveled the Atlantic on a sailboat by himself. So he is here to talk to us about stories. All these credentials are incredible. His specialty is teaching business transformation through storytelling, but really none of this to me matters as much as the fact that he is one of my best friends and the editor of Looking Over the Edge, which I'm sure you guys will hear a little bit about in the future. So Dave, welcome to my little corner of the sky.
Wow, Caro, great to be here. Finally.
I know.
We've been talking about this for so long. It's always good to see you.
I am so excited to share you with my community because these people are in for such a treat. Tell me why stories matter.
Stories matter because they're the most powerful form of communication we have. And I'll give you a quick example. Have you ever watched a terrible movie and you knew 10 minutes in it was going to be terrible and you watched the whole thing because you had to find out how the story ended?
Yes.
We've all done that. And we've all, oh my God, why did I sit for an hour and torture myself? But we want to know how the story ended. It's such a powerful thing.
That goes for books too. I've sat through one or a few books that I just want to know how the story ends, even though I don't even like how it's written, but I want to know how the story ends.
Yeah, plenty of that too. We tough it out, even if the journey's not very good, because we want to find out where, do they find the treasure? Do they fall in love? What is it? What is the transformation in the story? We've got to know.
Yeah, absolutely. So I don't know if you know this about my community, Dave, but every single day in our community, I share with my core lifers a daily affirmation. And every quarter we host a 28-day challenge. And in that challenge, we do daily affirmations for the girls that are brand new. And the very first affirmation that I share on day one of our 28-day challenge is, I am the author of an amazing story. You are the author of an amazing story. And I do that because I want to set these women up with the mindset that they are always writing their own story and the power of writing their own story. So because I started the 28-day challenge this month in February, I had this idea, and it was, I want to tie that first affirmation with an expert that will share with these women why storytelling matters, whether you're a speaker or a writer or a housewife or I don't know, any other type of entrepreneur or anything. Why does your story matter? That's the reason I'm here. But before we even get into that, I want you to share it with them, your story, because you have a very powerful story of sailing the Atlantic. So why don't you tell us a little bit about how you became a storyteller and how you discovered stories?
I'll give you the short version. I was a private prep school kid, headed off to, finish college and become a doctor or a lawyer or whatever it is. My father was a doctor and my mother was a lawyer. I grew up with certain expectations. But after my first year of college, I met these wacky people. I was working on this art project. I don't know if anyone remembers the Christo Surrounded Islands project, where they surrounded these islands in Biscayne Bay with a border of pink fabric. It was a massive project. You can look it up. But I met these wacky people who lived on sailboats. Really? You can live on a sailboat? None of them had any money, but they do odd jobs here and there, and they'd live in the free anchorage in Miami, and then they'd save up a little money and off they'd go. And they had the most amazing stories of storms and coral reefs and groundings and getting stuck here and getting stuck there. And I mean, and I thought, wow, I mean, I'd always read adventure books, but you can have real life adventures, not just books and movies. And I wanted that. And they removed a lot of limitations. I always thought, well, to live on a sailboat, you must have to be very wealthy. No, you just have to want to live on a sailboat. So before I finished college, I bought my first sailboat. It was a little 26 footer I bought for $3,000, and I started fixing it up. By the time 6 months after I graduated, I threw my big chain of keys into Biscayne Bay because I didn't need them anymore. And I set off for the Bahamas with $40 in my pocket and a
By
locker full
yourself.
of, by myself. I had a friend on the Gulf Stream crossing with me on that first passage, and then he flew back. I spent the next 6 months sailing by myself. And then I came back to the States, to the land of clocks and calendars, and worked for 6 months. And then I went back to the Bahamas. I spent 8 months in the Bahamas. And then a friend came by and asked if I wanted to go to Europe with him. And I thought about it for about a quarter of a second. I said, let's go. And so I helped my friend sail this beautiful wooden boat that he'd built with his own two hands. And we spent 38 days crossing the Atlantic. So to make a long story short, I found the stories I had been in search of.
Okay, so I have to stop you here. And for those of you that have your cameras off, and I can't see the reactions in your faces as you hear that this man right off of college went by himself into the Bahamas to sail for 8 months. Put it on the chat of, would you ever get on a sailboat by yourself and sail across the Atlantic for 8 months? Because I have to confess that as amazing as I think that is, I don't think I ever would have the freaking guts to get on a boat and do that. I am in awe of your courage. And the truth is, like with a story like that, of course you're a storyteller. I mean, my story is certainly not that big to be able to share.
Well, it's interesting that you bring up, I mean, people are afraid to do that. And most of the people who are afraid to, say, spend 38 days crossing the Atlantic are the same people who are completely unafraid to spend 2 hours a day on the expressway. And if you think about the statistical likelihood of something happening to you in one scenario versus the other, I was in a much safer situation. So many of the things that we're afraid of in life begin with what if? What if this happens? What if that happens? Now, I didn't just set off and go, well, how does a sailboat work? Maybe I'll learn on the way across the Atlantic. I did a lot of sailing, a lot of short hops. I learned my way. And when I felt confident enough to challenge myself, and again, the Atlantic crossing, I went with a friend of mine. So it's all baby steps. And it all sounds so romantic to say, oh, I sailed across the Atlantic. I did thousands of miles of sailing before I crossed the Atlantic. I knew what I was doing and I understood the risks, but even more so, I knew the biggest risk was that I would grow old and look back and regret the things I hadn't done because I'd been too afraid to do them.
You know, I love that you just said that. And I love that you said that everything starts with what if. Um, and you're right. I think the fact that part of my hesitation and part of why it's so awe inspiring in my mind that you did this is because I know nothing about sailing. I know nothing about being on the water. So I think water, drowning, but me by myself in the water, storm, and drown. Those are the things that come to my mind. But in reality, you're right. If I'm on an expressway for 2 hours, I'm taking a risk. Some people are afraid of flying. Others are afraid of speaking in public. I mean, we have all sorts of fears in our lives. And the fact that you can say, well, if I just learn enough about this and I get comfortable and I keep doing this thing, eventually I can venture off into the deep waters of that thing that I'm doing, whatever that thing may be. So I love that. I have some girls that are putting in the chat, and they are, first of all, Candace is ready to get on the sailboat with you. Candace is here and she's saying, let's go. And I have the feeling that she would do it. She would get in the boat. Then we've got Desiree, who says, I wish, but no way. So more along my lines here. Elena, I don't think I could do that for so long. Francis certainly would not do it. Mari would overthink every step. Nicole, absolutely not. And Francis says she would have made me go with her. And Daisy, she's thinking outside the box, because she said, yes, she would do it with a captain, because life is better in the Bahamas.
Right. But the other side of this is maybe with the captain, but maybe the story comes from learning to be the captain and then going with a friend. So initially you go with a captain because you want someone to, this is where the expression show you the ropes came from, right? Literally on a sailboat, you have to have somebody show you the ropes. But then you learn the ropes and you're thinking, gee, maybe I'm going to take somebody and mentor them. Now there's a story of transformation.
Well, it's interesting that you should say that, because I've heard that in order to be a mentor in anything, you really only have to be about 2 steps ahead of the person that you're mentoring, right? We think that in order to be an expert in anything, we have to be, Gandhi or Buddha to be able to be an expert. But in reality, you only have to just be a couple of steps ahead, because that allows you to be able to give the person behind you just enough of a headlight view to see what's up and coming. And that's what you're telling us today, is that it doesn't matter how big we are. What matters is just that we learn a little bit enough so that we can be able to inspire those behind us. Did I get that correctly?
Absolutely. And the best way to learn is to teach. For example, presentation skills. When I started coaching speakers is really when I started learning. And I'm thinking about, there's a local speaker, Errol Leandri, and I saw him in speaking contests and I offered to coach him. And he got all the way to the semifinals of the World Championship of Public Speaking, top 28 out of 30,000 contestants. Now, there's a guy with an instrument. He's got a voice. He's got presence. He's got the face. He's amazing. But he was raw. And when we took that and refined that, but figuring out what do you do with that? It's a different level of mentee. It's a different level of coaching. I've learned by watching hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of speakers and that's coaching. Amazing. You learn by teaching.
I agree. I totally agree. I'm considered a coach now with these groups that I lead, and I learn from them every day. I'm always learning. I always say, by being in the position that I'm in of coaching these women, I am the one that I feel like I'm getting the most benefit, because I'm learning so much from them and I'm constantly inspired. The women that I have in my groups are awe-inspiring. The obstacles they've overcome, the stories they have, everything that they go through is so incredible, which actually leads me to my next question. And that's, you're talking about this, you're a speaker and you're a coach. I'm a speaker and I'm a coach. We're both authors. Your client who won in the public speaking presentation. But for those of us that are not coaches, we're not authors, we're not speakers. Why does our stories matter? What matters about that? And why, does
Your
it,
story matters because one of our most innate, deep-seated desires is to be listened to, is to be understood. Unless we can make ourselves heard and understood, we're going to feel alone in the world. And stories are that connecting tissue, that wiring between people. And if you've ever met somebody and it's like, wow, this person just gets me like nobody else ever has. Like you feel like you found your soulmate. You feel such a deep sense of connection. So understanding your story and how to tell your story and what a story is, storytelling is such an important skill. And everybody's story matters. It doesn't have to matter to the world. It just has to matter to you. But whatever your journey through life is, that's your story. And it could be your work environment. And someone could walk into an office and see 6 cubicles put together and go, oh, how boring. But it may be that the repartee, the notes passed over the walls, the stuff that goes on in that little community of 6 people working in those boxes, you could write a novel about that if you were actually there on the inside. And it's all about people making connections, sharing an experience. And it's so important. I mean, it's one of the most meaningful life experiences. If you've ever been in a situation with, let's say you have 2 other people who escaped from a fire with you, or 2 other people who were on a vacation with you, or one other person, that shared experience makes you family. Nobody else is going to understand that experience the same way because they weren't there.
That's such a good point. So how do you tell a story?
A story, well, first is the golden rule of storytelling. Stories are always about people. If you're talking about prices, processes, ingredients, or data, you're not talking about people. You're not talking about people. You're not telling stories. If you're not telling stories, you're not connecting. And if you're not connecting, you're not selling. And okay, I just use a business term and maybe I see a couple frowny faces. Why is he talking about selling? But anyone who's asked for a raise is selling. Anyone who's applied for a job is selling. Anyone who's tried to get a kid to go to bed is selling. Selling is not about getting people to part with their money. Selling is about demonstrating that you are relationship worthy, that you are connection worthy. And any transaction, whether it's a romantic transaction or a financial transaction or a spiritual transaction, happens as a result of that connection.
I have somebody that's posting on the chat to me privately that they have been asked to tell their story about their separation with their husband, and they are scared to do it because she doesn't know how to say the story. She doesn't know what is oversharing or undersharing. She doesn't know if that story even matters, even though people are asking her to share it. So what do you have to say to somebody like that? Somebody that has, and before you answer that question, I also want to point out, yesterday I posted a daily affirmation, and we have one girl in our group who wrote a comment on the affirmation. And on that comment, she shared a very, very personal story, a story that would make you say, wow. And I could feel the energy of inspiration in the chat. I could see everybody responding to her story. And I thought, she's not writing a book about it. She's not on a podcast. She's not on social media. This is in a small, safe space. And she's only sharing with a small group of people. But she has now changed these people's lives by sharing that story. So with that in mind, I'd like for you to talk to that woman here that's being asked to share her story and give her a little bit of insight as to how she would go about something like that.
I love the question, and it's important. And it's something that a lot of speakers, even professional speakers, miss the boat on. So the purpose of a speech, or the purpose of a story for that matter, is to transform the audience in some way. I could get up on stage and tell sailing stories, and after a while, people are going to say, okay, that's great. He went sailing. It's interesting. It's okay. He got, in a storm, and that's interesting. But after a while, somebody, oh, my phone's buzzing, because it's not really about you. It's about me. And if you get up and you just talk about yourself for the sake of talking about yourself, well, narcissism is the only disease in the world where the sicker you are, the better you feel. And plenty of speakers are up there. So how do you put your story in the service of the audience? And the way you do that is you think fast forward to the transformation. How is my story going to benefit somebody else? What is the takeaway? And you literally tell your story about the audience. So a story usually involves a journey of some sort. And I'm not going to go into the whole story, but when I open my keynote, I talk about a time I was crossing the Gulf Stream from the Bahamas back to Miami. I got caught in a terrible storm, and it was rough, and it was freezing cold, and my battery died, and I was out there in these gigantic waves. Nobody could see me, and there were 2 freighters and a cruise ship that I had to dodge because they weren't going to dodge me. They'd run me over and never know it. And it was a pretty scary moment. And after I tell the story of, dodging the freighters and cutting behind the cruise ship, and I'm looking up into the back of the cruise ship, and I can see the disco, and I hear the silhouettes of people dancing, and I'm thinking, my God, I'm fighting for survival, and they're fighting to get to the bar for their 3rd margarita. We're having very different experiences. Okay, fun story. I can see you laughing, but then I say, have you ever felt like that in your life or in your business? Like you're out there in these rough seas, and there are these big ships, these big opportunities, these big influencers, people you want to meet, and they're just going by, and they'd run right over you because you're invisible. All of a sudden, that story is not about me on a sailboat. It's about the journey that my audience is taking. Whether it's in business or life, there's really no difference, right? Our businesses are part of our life.
And I'm thinking, well, for this woman who had who has a story to share, for any of you who have a story to share, when you look at it in the context that Dave's putting it, you go from you change your mindset from thinking this is, I'm bragging, boasting, it's self-serving, I'm talking about myself, nobody cares or wants to listen, to what about my story is relatable? Because if I've gone through it, chances are, we are bound by community. We don't live on islands, and our stories are always a lot more intertwinable, if that's a word, than we think they are. So the reason that people are asking you to share your story is because the pain you went through, guaranteed somebody is going through that pain right now. Guaranteed somebody is in that situation right now. And because you are those 2 steps ahead that we talked about 5 minutes ago, you can look back and say, this was my experience and this is how it will serve you. So once you change your mindset from this is boasting, bragging, self-serving, this is all about me, you go into how does my story serve someone else? And that's it. Now you've given your story purpose.
Exactly. And I'm just thinking, and I don't know the situation, but we had such a beautiful wedding. It was so romantic. There was chocolate cake, the best. It was wonderful. Oh, the honeymoon was so romantic. We went to Hawaii and da 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 da. Fast forward 5 years, and we're looking at each other and we're shaking our heads, saying, you know what? It's just time to go our separate ways. Now, it's easier to get into a relationship than out of a relationship. And going our separate ways meant dividing up the assets, dividing up the CD collection, or separating the bank accounts, and scrapping over who owns what, who gets to keep what. And all of a sudden, we're doing our best not to keep it ugly. But you know what? We're tearing things apart. And when you tear things apart, they bleed. Have you ever felt that way? Have you ever had a situation where you've had to leave a partner or leave a job or leave an abusive situation or what, and everyone's saying, yeah, now you've got them. By creating that contrast, right? You start everything like a marriage, you start with these beautiful expectations and this incredible experience and the celebration with your friends and family, and then everything implodes. It happens. And your audience is listening, not because it's your story, but because it's their story.
But you know,
and
what's
they're
interesting
connected
about
to
that,
you.
David? I'm going to interrupt you there, David, because what's interesting about that is that most people are afraid to share their story because they don't want to look like a failure. So for that story that you're sharing, as powerful as it would be to the listener, the teller may be feeling like, I'm hearing myself.
Maybe someone needs to mute their microphone.
Oh, there I go. Okay.
Okay.
So that the teller may be feeling like, if I share this, they're going to know that I failed. If I share this, they're going to know that I made these mistakes, or I'm embarrassed about the decisions I made. So tell me a little bit about that. I mean, what about the people that don't want to be vulnerable? They don't want other people to know their mistakes and their failures. Why does your story matter in that situation?
I think that leadership, part of being a leader, and look, if you're up there telling stories to influence people, and again, that doesn't mean to persuade, it means to influence them to appreciate you and your message. Of course, we don't want to, but right before this one, this morning I recorded a podcast and I was asked a question. And, I went off on a tangent and then I blanked on the question. And there was this long pause and I tried to figure it out. I finally said, John, I'm really sorry. You got to ask the question. I just spaced on it. Now I'm a presentation coach, right? But I'm thinking, I don't care if people see me screw up. It's going to happen. And the fact that I'm vulnerable and I'm in that leadership position because I'm the speaker or the podcast guest or whatever it is, that gives other people, because what the speakers and influencers I like the least are the ones who say, I've made millions of dollars and I'm a great success story. And I'm just thinking, so you've made millions of dollars, go out and spend your money. Do you really think it's meaningful to stick around and teach poor people how to be rich? If you're a real millionaire, go spend your money, go have some fun, or whether you do it to indulge yourself or whether you do it to feed people who need, or put shoes on people's feet or find fresh water for people. Go and find some purpose other than more selling. And it's the failures that.
For you, storytelling is about the authenticity of it. It's about impact. It's about sharing. It's about really transforming people's lives.
Yeah, that's where I find my meaning. I mean, look, we all want to make money, but there are plenty of things I could be doing for money that would bore me to death and fill my life with a purpose vacuum. And honestly, I'd rather be poor and have an impact on other people.
So I have some people writing on the chat, and Natalie wrote, sometimes she doesn't want to feel like a downer, and she doesn't want other people to feel sad about her story. And then Zoe wrote, people feel that if they're vulnerable, they're going to be looked as weak or they're going to feel judged. So is that okay? How do you deal with those feelings, Dave?
A couple of good things in the chat there that are worth addressing. So as far as being a downer, if you tell a story of gloom and despair and you leave people there, you can take the audience. And I'm using the term audience. It could be one person sitting across a restaurant table from you. But if you take the audience into the dark, you need to take them into the light, because stories are very powerful. And if you're watching, imagine you watched a movie and at the end of the movie, everybody just died. You would leave distraught, right?
Right.
I mean, this creates great business for the therapist community. But if you can take someone on that journey into the dark and then bring them back into the light, what they're experiencing is that journey to transformation. And that's where a story comes from. So I just had an aha moment with you saying that.
And the aha moment is oftentimes we don't want to share our story because we haven't found the light yet. And because we haven't found the light yet, we need other people's stories that have found the light so that we know there is light. So that therein lies the purpose. If you haven't seen the light yet, then you look for the community that's going to show you the light. And if you have seen the light, then you become the community for the people who need the light. And that's why it doesn't matter whether you are in the trenches or whether you're at the top of the mountain. Your story matters both ways.
Absolutely. Whether it's a big story or a small story or an incomplete story. And I'll give you an example. Okay, my Atlantic crossing ended in Gibraltar in 1991. It's been over for a long time. But now I'm taking those stories and I'm using those stories to add value to other people's lives. And at some point in my life, I think I'd like to go sailing again. And whether I cross the Atlantic again is immaterial. So my story's not over. My story's going to be over the day my heart stops beating. But if you wait for your story to be over, well, maybe you're not really telling stories, you're telling chapters and leaving some leeway. Because I think some people get paralyzed, like, oh, I haven't worked this out yet. You know, I'm the divorce isn't final yet. How can I tell the story? But it may just be the lessons that you've learned along the way on a larger journey. Stop waiting for the thing to be over, because when it's over, you're over, and you're not going to get to tell that story. All we get is parts and pieces.
I love that. I love what you just said right now is gold. Everybody can just log off and go home. There's nothing else to learn here. We're not telling the whole story. We're just telling chapters. That is invaluable advice. We are sharing chapters of our story, and it may be incomplete and it may be messy and it may change tomorrow. You know, I always say, I'm not married to my stories, in the sense that my story may be beautiful tomorrow and it may be ugly. I mean, my story may be beautiful today and it may be really ugly tomorrow. And that's okay, because things change. It's fluid, where we are alive. I love that. And it reminds me of a conversation that you and I have had, because you guys get Dave for about an hour, but I have had the privilege of having Dave for, I don't know how long it's been, 6 years or 5 years.
Seven.
No.
We met in San Diego. I've been at the NSA.
7
What?
years.
You're from Miami too? Yep. We've been hanging out for 7 years.
Oh my God. When you made me the chocolate, remember when you made me?
Okay.
Oh my goodness. So I've had him for 7 years, and we've had the most beautiful, powerful conversations. And it's the reason why I wanted to have that conversation in front of you guys, because I wanted you to get the benefit of his wisdom and his knowledge. And I remember you telling me when you wrote your book about the monk book.
The Blue Monk book, which is the sailing memoir. And the Blue Monk was the name of my sailboat, and it was named after the Thelonious Monk tune, the jazz tune called Blue Monk. And I never intended for me to be like the solo sailor, the Blue Monk. It sort of happened. So there's second meaning to it. But
well, you said something to me that changed my life. You said, I wrote the Blue Monk because I wanted to share my story. And it doesn't matter if it ever makes the New York Times bestseller list. It doesn't matter if it sells 1 million copies or 100 copies, because what matters to me is that when I die, I know that I'm leaving the story behind so that my daughter can one day read that story. And when I wrote my book, that you were the voice behind, I mean, besides the fact that you actually told me to write the book, which is a different story, but you were the voice behind my head saying, Caroline, you're going to share your story, whether it makes the New York Times bestseller list or not, because at the end of the day, you want your story to be told. And if the only thing that you get from it is that your children grow up and can read this to your grandchildren, then you've done your job. And that's one of the things about sharing our stories. We think when we think about sharing our stories, we think big, like we have to be big. And in reality, our story, our legacy could be just in our family. Our legacy could be one person to one person. Our legacy could be the impact that we have at the grocery store with the cashier in front of us. Our legacy matters so much, and we are connected by these stories.
Absolutely.
I know that I didn't have a question attached to that.
No, but there's
it was an aha moment that I had with you.
There's so much there, but I'll tell you, I have my daughter's 15 and a half, and teenagers are just I was a teenager, and now I'm starting to remember, because people say what a difficult time that is, and when you're a teenager you think, I don't get it, it's not difficult at all. Then you look back as an adult and you think, wow, what a difficult time that is. And of course my daughter's at the age where she thinks, how could my parents have gotten so old without learning anything? Because that's just that mentality. But one day I'm going to be gone, and whether it's her or her kids or whatever, it's like, I wonder what my dad was really all about. And I've got this little piece of my life encased in this little paper brick to leave behind. It's very gratifying. Also, stories are a burden. And when you carry a story around with you through life, it gets heavier and heavier. And when you get it out and you put it on paper in that shareable form, then it's like you still have the story, but it doesn't weigh so much.
Oh, I love that. That is making me want to tell everybody on this call to write a freaking book. Just write your story, write your book. And if you need an editor, Dave Bricker's the guy for you. Just call him and he'll make your story wonderful. And wow, that is amazing. That is amazing.
We got a couple of things. We got a couple of things in the chat here.
And I've got Natalie, who's a light's going off in her head. Would you like to share, Nat? Wait, I can't hear you because you're muted.
Oh, sorry. I'm actually neighbors with Zoe, and I was in a workout and I walked over to her house, and I'm finishing the Zoom here. No, because it honestly just like makes so much sense. Like I just wrote it in the chat that it's like they always say that there's different seasons of life, different seasons of change, and I can now coordinate or like connect that with chapters, right? Because in my specific life, like I feel like I've lived so many seasons of life in one life, or I've have so many chapters in one life, and it's just having to put that down and like talk about it. I want to have that strength and to be able to share that, so I just thank you for saying that, because it just light up a light where now I'm like, okay, I could just start writing and see where it takes me,
Yeah, don't try to swallow it whole. Life is too big. You got to break it down. And
exactly.
and I think Caroline and I had a similar process, but when I wrote my sailing memoir, I had all these stories, and I just started writing the time this happened, the time I met so-and-so, the time I went here, the time I went there. I just wrote titles, no particular order. And I started writing them in no particular order, and each one became its own story. And then I thought, okay, let me make an arc out of these. Let me put these in order, and let me make sure that I introduce characters at the right time. And maybe I wrote a big introduction to a certain character and said, oh, but he also appears earlier in the book. So let me transplant that. And it turned into a big fat bunch of stories. And you can read it as an arc, or you can open up to a random chapter and just read the story. Caroline, when Caroline came back from vacation and called me and said, I got to tell you what happened. Blah, blah, blah. She started spewing. The enthusiasm, there was this fountain of energy, and this happened and that happened. I said, while this is fresh, outline it out, write it down. And then I said, your kids were there, your husband was there. Interview everybody, get everybody, because they're going to see it differently. And you've read the result. It's a very good book. And I mean, you get that all out, and then you start polishing it and whittling it down. And we had tremendous fights over what should be left in and what needed to, I mean, it's part of it, but you see the result of it, and it's a damn good book, but it's a damn good story.
That's the story of a writer and her editor. The fact that we're still friends is a story in of it itself, because he haunted me every night, and we had to fight over the story, but it was I'm so grateful to you, Dave, because you made me a better writer. You inspired me to actually put my story down on paper at a time when I was stuck on a different book. I was going to write, I was writing the book with my dad, and I'd been working on that for so long. And I felt like a big fat failure at the time, because I couldn't get the story out. And then I had that trip, and you said to me, Caroline, you interrupted my story, and you're like, there's so much stuff here. Just put it down on paper, just write this thing. And I felt like I was cheating on my dad. I felt that I was betraying my project, which felt like a failure in and of itself. And between you and Susan Ford Collins, you both inspired me to put the other project aside and to ride the wave, to ride that wave, and to write that chapter. And now that I've done that and that I obeyed you, and being on the other side of it, I realized, gosh, of course I can write my dad's book if I decide to write my dad's book. And of course I can live. I have so much life to live. It's like Natalie just said, there's so many different chapters, and there's some really sad chapters, and there's some really happy chapters. And then there's chapters where not much is going on. And sometimes that's a relief as well. And we get to decide whether, what are the stories that we want to share.
And if I can interrupt you, another thing we did is with every one of those chapters, we talked about what's in it for the reader. Are you telling this story because you want to unburden yourself of it? Or are you telling your story because you want to get that reader to think, feel, or act differently in some way? And every single story's got something to think about, some value to offer. And what a great way to organize the stories we write, the chapters of our lives that we write. Am I just serving myself, or am I creating a story where maybe in this chapter of life I'm raising my children, or I'm starting a business to introduce a product that is going to add value to people's lives, or I'm solving a problem for people. Whatever it is, what is the transformation in any particular chapter of your life? Because if you don't have one, that's where you're going to start to feel rudderless.
Yeah, I love that. And that's, and I think that we get to write the stories in both ways. I think we get to, if you're writing the story to share it with the universe, to share it with the public, to leave it behind, then you take that approach. And if you're writing your story just to unburden yourself, that's okay too. You put that in a journal, you get it out on paper, you vent to a friend. It's the idea that your story matters no matter how you're using it. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, and I'll give you an example. Back when I was in my, between those sailing trips, I spent 6 months in Washington, D.C. working. And I'll tell you what, going from being a free-spirited boat bum in the Bahamas to working for corporate in Washington, D.C. with no transition time in between is really bad for your mental health. Don't ever do that. It was rough on me. And during that time, I, just because I was processing stuff, I kept a dream journal. It was it was sort of inward bound, following outward bound. But when I was done with that experience, I took it and I threw it in the trash. It's my personal baggage. It's not stuff to share with the world. It's not going to enlighten anybody. And even I started to reread some of it and I thought, I'm done with this. I dumped it. It served its purpose. That was writing for me, and it unburdened me of my load, and that was great. And then there are other books where I'm always thinking, okay, what do I want to teach my reader? How do I want them to feel about the information, about themselves? How do I want to empower them? And it's the same thing in speaking. Always, I mean, people who are nervous about this, I always say turn nervous into service.
Oh, I love that. I
Yeah.
love that. And a question that I want to ask you is, this is what I'm hearing. So I want to know if you agree, and I want you to explain this a little bit more to our audience. And it's the idea of, even if you're not writing a story, what is the value of living your life as if it were in story form?
Well,
Why do you look at your life?
Well,
Why
what
should
does
we
that
look at
mean,
our lives like
Caro?
a story? Well, that's what I want him to talk about.
well, I think this idea that we have some power to write our stories, to control our destinies, to choose goals and achieve them, to choose our co-conspirators, to choose our settings. If you're not the active author of your story and you're just waiting for life to happen to you on Netflix, you're probably not going to have a very rich life. It doesn't mean you need to climb Mount Everest. Look, 4,000 people have been to the top of Mount Everest. It's not even as glamorous as it was 100 years ago. But are you authoring your life? And then are you authoring your life to serve yourself, which you should, but are you authoring life as well to serve the people around you? And are you struggling with those questions, finding that balance between, what's just going to happen to you because of fate or good luck or bad luck, and the parts that you can control? And when you hit a snag, when something happens, when there's a sudden tragedy, or all of a sudden you walk into work and guess what? We're letting you go and you weren't expecting it. We all get blindsided. Are you seeing that as a tragedy? Or are you saying, okay, that sucks, but what a great thing to have in my story. How am I going to handle this?
I love that answer, and it's exactly what I envisioned. I think there's benefit in looking at your life and saying, I'm going to take control, and I'm going to, there's certain things I cannot change, but there's certain things I can, and I'm going to live this life that I have. And when you look at it as as a story, imagine if you were, if you're looking at it like, well, somebody's going to be telling this at a bonfire over marshmallows one day. They're going to be talking about this. What would they say? How would I have, will I be the victor? Will I be the victim? How will I be played out? And how will my story help other people live better lives than they would have had they not heard the story? I think there's a lot of power in that.
Yeah, and how will I make somebody feel like, wow, they're not so alone in the world? Because maybe I said something and they go, yeah, okay, me too. And that's that power, I think, because all of us, even those of us who get up on stage or on screen and look so confident, we all battle the demons of self-doubt every day of our lives. We're all afraid our story's not big enough. We're all afraid nobody cares what we have to say. We're all afraid nobody's going to get us. We're all afraid that if we take the risk, we're going to end up at the bottom of the ocean. And we're afraid. It's part of the human condition. And as we battle the demons of self-doubt, if we do it alone, boy, is that a tough battle. And when we realize that even people we look up to, even our heroes, they're fighting the same fight. We're all in the trenches together, and that's powerful. That helps you get through life.
It really does. It really does. We have about 9 minutes left, and I want to know, does anyone have any questions they want to ask of Dave? Because there's so much wisdom here that I want to give this time to you guys. Is anybody
Takes one to know one.
Oh, my friend, you are amazing. If you want to ask a question, you're more than welcome to put it on the chat. I've got Betsy. Betsy raised her hand. My dear Betsy, Dave, you know all about Betsy.
Oh, absolutely. I was thinking about you with what I was saying.
Absolutely. Okay, so I want to start by telling you, Dave, that you have no idea how much you mean in my life, because even though you and I haven't directly worked together, you had a lot to do with helping Caro become the writer, the storyteller that she's become. and she was my Dave Ricker, right? I paid an editor, I paid another editor, and I have decided that I am going to think that I paid for organization and accountability, because she did not help me become a better writer, and she did not do as good a job in editing. What Caro did for me, how she taught me how to become a better writer, how she explained this whole thing of like writing not from like a passive tense, or like what you would tell her in terms of, don't narrate, don't tell me, like show me, right? Like all those things that she learned from you, she taught me. So I am forever grateful for you. And if I write another book, I am going to go straight to you. I'm not going to waste my time with other editors.
Well, thank
And
you.
so
About time.
I just wanted to say, like, thank you, because sometimes, again, sometimes you don't know how your story impacts people that you don't even know are being impacted, because it's been shared, and you're inspiring indirectly. So thank you for that.
Well, and thank you. And look, I know Caro showed you my boot prints on her butt, and now you've got hers on yours, and now you have to go do it for somebody else, because believe me, I had an editor who just, I thought I was such a hotshot writer, and I got my butt handed to me. And it's just, you learn it by teaching it. Once you get it, you're a stronger communicator. And I think and Carol, would you agree? It's really more mindset than anything else.
Yes. Yes.
Thank you, Betsy.
It's beautiful. So thank you. And I wanted to share something that I read in a book. I'm on my phone, so that's why it doesn't show. But in this book by the comedian, what's his name? Jeez, you can't make this up. Kevin Hart. He wrote, "Life is a story full of chapters, and the beauty of life is that not only do you get to choose how to interpret each chapter, but your interpretation writes the next chapter. It determines whether it's comedy or tragedy, fairy tale or horror story, rags to riches or riches to rags. You can't control the events that happen to you, but you can control your interpretation of them. So why not choose the story that serves life the best?" It just reminded me when you were talking about like living your life as if it were a story, and being the author and being mindful of that. I think it's beautiful to decide, is this story gonna be rags to riches, riches to rags? And I always say that I lived a fairy tale, and then there was a season, a chapter of tragedy and a lot of pain, but I wanted the happy ending of the fairy tale. So I have decided mindfully to create a fairy tale, not just in a book, but in my life. And I see the value of living life as a story, because we get to determine how we're going to end that chapter, and what it's going to look like, regardless of the outside.
And this attitude, I think, leads to, it's the difference between going through life with scars or going through life with open wounds. And we get wounded, we get hurt, we get our scars, but we move on. And at every chapter, what do you do at the end of a chapter when you're writing? You think, why should the reader turn the page? I think it works on and off inside and outside of a book.
I love
and there's
that.
Something else. I'm sorry. I know. There's one more thing that I wanted to share that I realized even in writing the book. Oftentimes we think our story only matters to the people, like our immediate family, the people around us. But every story is big enough and important enough to inspire someone else. And I realized in my experience that there were people watching, and I remember feeling I had like a scarlet letter, like, oh, there goes the mom that just lost a daughter, right? Like, and it was excruciating at the time. But I realize now that those people that were looking at me like I was, I don't know, an extraterrestrial thing, like were like paying attention. They were watching. They were trying to see, like, let me see if she can overcome this. Let me see if, and those very people have come to me and said, like, I know that I can overcome this thing that I'm going through because I saw you do it too. So every every story matters, and every story will inspire another person if we tell it, or if we live it, right? Sometimes you don't have to tell it, like you said, it could be in a journal, but if you live it, other people are watching.
Yeah, and if you change the life of one person, you've changed the world. So why not risk telling your story?
Yeah, and I actually love what Betsy just said, and then we're going to move on to Elizabeth, because Elizabeth has a question before we end. But part of telling your story is living the story. That it's just as important to live it as it is to tell it. So even if you are shy, even if you're a person who isn't going to write a book, or isn't going to go on a podcast, or isn't going to open a public social media account, or isn't going to coach people, just by you living your life in a way that is inspiring, you are a storyteller, because you are being an example, you're being a legacy builder, and you're inspiring other people to live better than you lived. So that's why you get these, sometimes you get these eulogies about the grandma, or the dad, or the uncle, that nobody knows about him. He's not going to come out on CNN. They're not going to do a huge piece in the New York Times for him because he was so famous or popular. But God, everyone who knew him was inspired by him. Everyone who ate her food, had a story to tell, because the way she lived, the way he lived, the way they were the story. They are the story. So be the story. Be the story. Elizabeth, you have a question, and I want to honor your question before we end now at 11.
Thank you. I have loved this this conversation. I am at the point where my manuscript has just received my very first rejection letter from an agent, and a couple of authors who I know and respect. One loves it and thinks it should go everywhere. The other one thinks I need changes. What advice would you give to somebody like me who's kind of just at the precipice of, the publication journey? Because there's so many options.
Well, you've got two questions wrapped into one. One is about whether the book should go everywhere or not. And this whole business of selling books is a whole different thing. It's called Bob Berg. I don't know if any of you have read The Go-Giver. He always says it's called the bestseller list, not the best writer list. Right. And you can write an amazing book, but let's face it, My Secret Life with Britney Spears is going to sell more copies than your brilliant book, because big publishers are in the business of selling books and in huge volumes, and they're damn good at it, and I respect them. But if you've got a story to tell, whether it ends up on the New York Times list or not is really immaterial. I've self-published every one of my books. I'm not particularly interested in finding a publisher. I'm not sure a big publisher would be particularly interested in finding me. And for me, I mean, I've got novels, I've got a memoir, I've got a bunch of stuff, and then I have some practical business books and educational books. Each has a different audience. I put them out there, I make them available, and hopefully they're going to get me a speaking opportunity. Again, the memoir, hopefully my daughter is going to read it. Just produce the best possible book you can, and don't quit your day job. There's don't conflate, should. And then the other thing is, work with a great editor, find several people, get them to mark up a page or two, and work with the one who gives you the feedback that you feel most comfortable with, and then fight with that person until it's just right. It's a journey. Writing the manuscript, writing the first draft is 90%, and then editing is the other 90%.
Yeah, and we're sort of at that stage. I worked with somebody who I loved, and we actually didn't have many conflicts. I felt like she was kind of a mind reader, and she sort of drew out what I needed to be on the page. So she did it in such a way, because there were a lot of really painful parts of it. It's a true story. and we work great together. But you know, this is a very this is the unknown at this point. You know, writers just want to go into their hidey hole and write, but putting the book into the world is a big question mark. I don't know about this part of it. So
I'm happy to advise you on that. And there's also, I don't write in this website anymore, but there's a website that a blog I used to keep. I haven't written in it for 4 years, but it's called theworldsgreatestbook.com. And it's full of practical,
excellent information.
It's full of advice about writing, publishing, and book design. And if you have any questions, just reach out. I'm happy to give you some advice and steer you around some of the publishing pitfalls. That's easy stuff. I'm happy to do it.
So in accordance with our schedule, we have to end the call, but I do want everyone to be able to reach Dave Bricker if they want his incredible wisdom and advice and coaching and editing and all the skills that he has to offer. So how can we reach you, Mr. Bricker? Don't give him your cell phone because that's exclusive to me.
Okay. Well,
my time. Just kidding. How do they reach you?
The best way is storysailing.com, SAILING. And if you forget that and go to davebricker.com, it takes you to the same exact place. So either of those will work. And my cell phone number is buried in there somewhere, my email address. I'm easy to get a hold of. And
follow him on social media, on LinkedIn. You're on Instagram, but you're not.
But really I never post there and I never pay attention to it.
Yeah.
That's going to change. You know, but I'm on Facebook and I'm on LinkedIn and I'm on my own website. And because I'm launching this new project, I've kind of soft launched it, but I've still got a few bugs. It's called 52speakingblunders.com. And it's a video every week. And it's the mistakes that speakers make.
It's going to be great.
So that's coming up. And hopefully in a day or two, I'll have that ready to go. But the best way to get a hold of me is storysailing.com.
Well, this has been
do you have an email list or something that we can sign up to so we can get
Absolutely.
I do on storysailing.com. I have, and I'm really pivoting to videos. So there's been after over 2 years, there's been a hiatus in the every 2 weeks mailings, but I've been producing tons of video content. So I'm moving to a video blog format and talking about some other possibilities. So there's a shift happening. But the list is active and you can sign up anywhere on the blog. Thanks for asking that.
Well, thank you, Dave, for giving us an hour of your busy day. I am honored to have you on as a guest. I'm honored to share you with my audience. I hope everybody is as inspired as I am, because when I hang up the phone with Dave Bricker, I can literally conquer the world. So I hope that right now everybody is ready to write their story and create the best story of their lives, because they are ready to conquer the world, because you've had an hour with my dear, dear, dear friend.
Well, Caroline, we've been on this journey together for a long time. And I think about where we were when we met as speakers, as writers, all of this stuff. It's really been a tremendous journey. I thank you for having me on today, and the world should be honored to be conquered by you.
Thank you, my love. All right, everybody, we will hang on for a couple of minutes for anybody who wants to say some last things to Dave, but you are all free to go. The conversation is officially over. Have a great day, everybody, and conquer your weekend with a great story.